Yes, the Mannin line for the next 46 minutes. We are pleased to get your calls, everything. We're getting a lot of texts in, we have in the first hour, because we have a very lively panel in front of me, I'm pleased to say. It's Margaret Mansfield of Malew Commissioners, but also been involved in a whole lot of other things, including education. Daphne Caine, MHK, who ran, you may remember, a lightning campaign and won election in 2016 for Garff, and the Treasury Minister, Alfred, Cannan, up there in the north of the island. Remember, we want to hear from you, but whatever you say, please be legal, honest, decent and truthful. To call 66 13 68, text 166 177 and email at studio@manxradio.com. We are getting a lot of contributions for you, but I just want to raise one subject, and that's to do with rates that was raised in Tynwald. The subject of rates, there seems to be this sort of table tennis match going on between Laurie Hooper and Chris Thomas at the moment about when this is going to come forth. But one thing that Mr. Thomas did say, he alluded to, was the fact that commercial rates were going to be looked at. Now, at the moment, Margaret Mansfield, places like Malew, places like Braddon, rely a lot on commercial rates, don't they?
Absolutely, and I do hope there's a considerable amount of discussion over this before anything actually happens.
Your newsletter says there's no increase in rates paid for a resident. Would this change if you lost commercial rates?
I'm pretty sure it would, actually, but that's my view, not the view of Malew Commissioners. We were described recently on social media as uber-rich Malew.
Sorry, say that again.
Uber-rich.
Uber-rich,
yes.
Right.
Well, we're not uber-rich, but certainly...
It's very useful what's going on up there above Cool Road, isn't it?
Oh, very useful. But you mean the bypass?
No, the general increase in commercial manufacturing base up there, which obviously does pay rates.
Of course it does.
Pays it to you guys
and
as well.
pays it to us, yeah.
So would you object to the commercial aspect being taken off you?
I think the ratepayers would object, very definitely. And I frankly, I wouldn't blame them, because they will eventually, I'm sure, and I'm speaking again, not as a Malew Commissioner, my own view. I think ultimately there will be an all-Ireland rate, but I think it's a long way off.
All-Ireland rate, Daphne Caine?
Well, it seems on the cards. There are certainly several all-Ireland rates. The way a Minister for Policy and Reform was referring to it, first of all, he said property tax several times. He also talked about the all-Ireland sewage rate, the all-Ireland water rate, and an all-Ireland leisure rate. And I think I asked a question at the end and said, if you're having all these national rates for different aspects, what part of the local rate would be set by the local commissioners, and what spending authority would they have or responsibility for delivering services? Because I always thought that the point of rates was that they were a local charge made for the delivery of local services. And I didn't hear very much about that, nor if it's going to be a property tax or several national rates, what about the ability to pay? And I suppose the suspicion that most ratepayers have is that whatever results, it's going to mean higher cost.
Yeah, I think one thing is certain, Alfred Cannan, that we are heading towards shove as far as rates concerned. This debate has gone on for decades. We are seemingly going in a direction where something will be discussed, at least, and debated, rather than just pushed to the sidelines, as happened in the past.
Well, one would hope so. It's Tynwald has asked for this. They've supported it in the programme for government. So there is a general mood that rates need to be discussed and reviewed. The reason why it's not moving at any fantastic pace is that the government's had a huge number of priorities laid out in front of it, including an absolute key priority for economic growth, including an absolute key priority to address the cost of living crisis that I would describe as being affecting many people on the island, including dealing with a number of international matters, not least Brexit and the EU potential blacklisting, grey-listing that we're facing. So the government is working across a huge number of areas. There's a significant number of projects going on, including, as we've talked about, a significant review of health services. So it's no wonder that the central government is pressed and is unable to get everything out at perhaps the pace that people want.
You seem to be saying we should accept some slippage in this area. It's acceptable because of everything else that's going on.
What I'm saying is this conversation needs to happen, but there are a number of factors underwriting this as well that I think Chris Thomas is right to highlight. I think he wants to see what's going to happen, what proposals are going to come from the MUA around its new pricing strategy. Bear in mind, last year we made a pretty bold decision to write off £95 million of Manx Utilities Authority's debt so that we could start to get a grip and control on the utilities pricing and the speed and impact on that on a residents on the island. So we've successfully done that. The MUA have got to come forward with their pricing strategy. There may be opportunities within that pricing strategy to look at how water is being both effectively paid for, and where that payment goes, because at the moment it's being collected by central government. Is there an argument to say that should be collected by the MUA? But the key point is that I think we need to give Chris Thomas, give the Cabinet Office the time to get the framework drawn up, to get the challenges identified, and then to bring it forward so we can have a proper and considered debate.
Is it going to happen in the time of this government, do you think?
Well, I think when you look at this, you have to say, why is there so much talk about rates? And that is because, and I think most of us who have seen rates in action across the island will accept there's a number of disconnects around the island, a number of people in similar sized houses paying different rates, people paying different charges for water, paying different charges for services, and we need to try and get some answers, if nothing else, for fairness. But in terms of the priorities, as I've said, the government's had a huge amount on its plate and has had to set about addressing some of those much more broader and international challenges and challenges around the economy. But I think we're drawing to a stage in the next 12 months where we will have this conversation.
Well, let's just move on. I wanted to go on to communications in a specific way in a minute, but first of all, we have a caller on, Geraldine, who wants to return to the Braddon hub. Geraldine, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for taking my call.
That's fine, yeah. Well, your questions about the Braddon hub, which we were talking about earlier, about this facility, basically, for children with needs.
That's right. I just want to back up everything that Daphne has said, that this unit was purpose-built and opened by the Right Honourable Eddie Tier back in 2007. It was a lifeline to my family. My son is very complex learning difficulties. He's non-verbal. He needs all of his cares attended to. He cannot be left unattended for very long at all, beyond minutes. Needs constant attention. And when the unit opened, it provided 24-hour respite care. And someone in their wisdom decided that Braddon didn't need to provide round-the-clock care. They would just provide day care. Why, I cannot imagine. And now a lot of the space at Braddon Resource Centre provides clinical space. So there's ongoing clinics going on there for outpatient basis. So there's constant throughfare of families and their children coming to clinics. There's constant footfare of office workers coming to office space. And this all goes through where the children receiving respite care are.
Do you feel there should be a separate part of the building where it is peaceful and quiet, where children like your own can actually be?
Absolutely. They never should have allowed clinical space to set foot in there. There's umpteen places where there can be clinical facilities made available. There's loads of GP facilities lying half empty with no GPs working, and they decide to put a clinic in a respite centre. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Let's just move this to Daphne, Geraldine. Yeah, it does seem like a bit of a scrambled egg of an arrangement, doesn't it?
I completely agree, and thank you, Geraldine, for phoning in. I'm feeling really the health department perhaps could explain what resources it's planned will provide for these children and enable families like Geraldine's to have access to the respite care previously provided. It seems like there's been a big downgrading, and I think there was also a lack of provision that there formerly was. For instance, the sensory room.
Yeah, Geraldine.
Yes,
the sensory room.
Money, yeah. The sensory room is no bigger than like a confessional box, and very, very little of anything left of sensory equipment in that room that hasn't been broken or removed, or God knows where it has gone. But the high-tech, high-spec offices and the high-tech, high-spec clinical rooms are out of this world. Now, how does my son benefit from that? The place that he absolutely adored. My son is non-verbal. He loved the sensory room, as many of the children did. A sensory room is an essential piece of kit for special needs children, especially children on the autistic spectrum.
Geraldine,
no money spent on that.
We will follow this up. Manx Radio will follow this up and make inquiries about this. Obviously, it's object for great concern for yourself. We will put that. But thanks for raising it anyway.
John, can I ask you, John, that whenever people investigate these things, the devil is in the detail, because when you speak to civil servants or you speak to managers, the charm and language they use will convince you that the situation is otherwise. But please speak to other parents. Many parents are afraid to say anything in case they lose the little respite they're already getting. But the service was a lifeline to me and my family, and I'm very grateful for it.
Okay, we will make inquiries. Geraldine, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, we'll have to look into that because I'm not entirely familiar with the background to that. Let's just move on to something that I mentioned earlier, and it was communication, social media. I know a lot of children, I suppose, suffer from social media. There are ways that children, it can go on late at night, exchanges between children, it can happen, and they come out in the morning, A, not having had an awful lot of sleep, and B, being absolutely distressed because of what has happened. I mean, before, I went to school and you went home. We didn't go home, I was at a boarding school, but it sort of stopped at night time. May have started again the next morning, but it stopped at night time. But we are in a different era now. This comes in from Simon, who says, is the Communications Bill 2018 being introduced into the House of Keys on Tuesday by Mr. Malarkey an attempt to silence social media criticism of government by stealth? Well, I suppose that's one aspect. There is that claim by some people. But can I just raise this one as well? Mobile phones for students in schools as well. It was considered in Tynwald. It was turned down by Tynwald, although some schools, it's been left up to some schools to work out whether, in fact, they feel it is a good idea. In Castle Rushen High School, they're looking at a possible ban on Key Stage 3 pupils. The Education Minister, Graham Creageen, says although the devices are seen by some as distracting, they can also be an important communication tool for parents.
It's picking up, it's whether they're going to do any after-school clubs, and also there's a safety issue there sometimes where they want to know where they've gone and where they're off to, so yeah, you've got to see both sides of it.
Yeah, it's a big subject and obviously will be discussed quite frequently. Daphne, Caine, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, as a parent myself, I have to confess the mobile phones my children have are generally for my convenience in terms of confirming arrangements for pickups or for after-school activity. But my impression of it is the mobile phone, the access to information and the 24/7 social media is all part of our current world, and it's going to get even more so in future. And to me, the most important thing is that children learn when it's appropriate to use their mobile phones. So of course in some lessons they should not be used, but they should be switched off and remain in the ownership of each individual child.
I don't know what happens in the school classroom, whether kids when they go in...
Well, I'd hope they weren't on their phone, but in terms of the pinging overnight, I mean, I did hear in the induction for Ramsey Grammar School, Mrs. Baker make a very good point to say, take these off your Year 7 students, because overnight with the pinging in of messages and comments and likes, that's almost like a drug to the brain, and children need to be removed from it. But to me, they just need to learn what is appropriate use of their mobile phone, and that applies to their social life as well as their school life.
Mrs. Mansfield.
I think obviously the head of Ofsted, or ex-head of Ofsted in UK, has suggested banning mobile phones. The head of Brighton College has banned mobile phones in school time, and I think this, to me, it's a no-brainer.
Brighton College is a sixth form college, or what?
No, it's a boarding school in the south of England. One of the top schools.
The children's ages are
11 upwards.
11 upwards, right? Okay.
Right across the board. Mobile phones in classrooms, I think that's just completely wrong.
Is it wrong because we would never have access?
No, what is the point?
Is it an important... The Education Minister says they can be an important tool.
They can be, but not in a classroom, in my view.
Alfred Cannan, what do you think of this?
Well, I think there is undoubtedly an issue with some children having almost unfettered access to the technology and how they use that and when they use that, and children potentially abusing that and parents not knowing what's going on. So I think this is all about education, and perhaps I think for many of us as parents who can witness and see this, it's about introduction of some form of discipline, particularly at home, in terms of how and when children can, particularly young children, can use and access their technology. And we have to keep discussing this, because I can see problems emerging in some areas with this, and it's not surprising this is becoming increasingly a feature of discussion. And I think the first NHS unit for sort of internet addiction for children has just opened in the UK. So there is absolutely a real problem here. It's been explored and is continuing to be explored. And I think first and foremost, the parents themselves have to absolutely start to be firm with their children, if necessary, remove these items from them, particularly at night time and when they can't actually see what's going on.
It is actually difficult removing one for a night time. You don't know where they hide them.
But the other thing is we have fantastic opportunities. A lot, the open access on the island to all sorts of activities, sporting activities, cultural activities. We've got to absolutely make sure, and parents have to take absolute responsibility to make sure their children are being integrated into these opportunities, so they're not just focusing on social media and mobile technology. But on the other hand, of course, it does play an integral role, as Daphne says, in our society today. And I'm sure that some schools use mobile technology in their lessons very positively, and for children it gives them a much broader access to information, to learning material, and I'm hopefully you would expect it to be more broadly beneficial to our children as they undertake their studies particularly.
Would you agree that discipline is lacking in a lot of areas in modern life? You come from a military background where obviously discipline was very important. Other areas of life, I'm talking about obesity with children, mobile phones, all sorts of areas where perhaps the modern view is that perhaps the discipline that we would have accepted when we were kids is no longer appropriate and shouldn't be applied.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's all about discipline. I mean, there's modern society grows, evolves, develops. And when we talk about things like obesity, I don't think it's just discipline that we're looking at, but perhaps as parents, both parents have increasingly gone to work these days. Perhaps they just don't have time to think about going home and going through all the preparations. Perhaps our parents did. When there was one person working. So there's a lot of other pressures, and as a society we're dealing with those. We're becoming increasingly aware of them, and it's like everything. We have to take positive steps, and I think the important thing is that increasingly it's just less about the government acting in isolation, but in all these things it's important about the community engagement. It's important that people have a say. It's important that we listen to, particularly when we're talking about children, children's education and obesity and sport, etc., that we're having a proper engagement with parents, and we're moving towards interacting more successfully rather than the government just dictating something's wrong and therefore this is the way to deal with it.
Let's take another break. You're listening to the Mannin line off the back of present politics. With me is Margaret Mansfield of Malew Commissioners, Daphne Caine, MHK for Garff, and Alfred Cannan, Treasury Minister and Ayre, and Michael MHK. And this is addressed to Mr. Cannan. Regarding beneficial ownership, could Mr. Cannan comment and please list those members of Tynwald who have beneficial ownership within companies tendering for government contracts? Maybe he could have a full list put in the local paper. That's fairly radical thinking, I think. That's one out of the left outfield.
All I would say is there's a very firm list of members' interests for Tynwald members, and things like shares and directorships are required to be listed. So one would expect that Tynwald members, and if they haven't been open and honest, there will be some form of sanction. One would expect, but that is all listed.
If members don't excuse themselves from a debate in which they should excuse themselves, I suppose they're alerted to that by other members who will be aware of this, I suppose, in some regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tynwald members generally are pretty good at declaring their conflicts of interest as and when they arrive.
Thoroughly agree with Geraldine, this again about the Braddon Hub. More plush offices instead of care of these children, which needs the service that was there but removed. Disgusted. It sounds odd that the service, Daphne, that was doing a good job, it sounds like, was altered. You wonder why it was
That's my
altered.
impression from my
mailbag. We don't know a lot about what
well, it's up for I suppose it's up for the health department. I think it was a purpose-built resource centre for children with special needs, and it was a hugely welcome resource centre and respite centre for a decade, for 10 years or more, and suddenly it seems to have been repurposed. There's been a change of use. There's been, as Geraldine said, officers put in there. I don't know, I've never been there, but the bit that particularly shocked me was the fact that the sensory room, amongst all the swanky offices, the high-tech offices that had been fitted out for the clinicians or the community care people who have now, or based in what was formerly the Braddon Resource Centre, now the sensory room, there's no money left to refurbish that. So as small as it was, as Geraldine described, that would have to be a matter for fundraising. So
As a confessional, it sounds like a fairly inadequate size, really, doesn't it? Just moving on, I noticed this, the Infrastructure Highway Services, please help us improve local streets, roads, buses, cycling. A survey used by your local council to understand what residents think of transport and highway services. what is good, what needs improving. Any resident aged 16 or over living at this address can take part. We want to hear from a wide range of people. You will enter into a prize draw with a £500 first prize as a thank you. And there's a whole lot of, I don't know if you've seen this or not, a whole list of things that go into it, which boxes that you tick. How satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the local situation in this regard? Potholes, obstructions, how your local council deals with it. What do you think of this as an idea of getting the people involved, of actually offering them a bit of cash at the end of the day if they get involved?
Well, I think this is.
Can I just pass that over?
This is a move by the infrastructure department and the minister to really drive down to spending some more money improving some of our minor roads, some of our access routes to local estates. Because I think Ray Harmer's already committed to doing this, to try to get some improvement in these areas. And it's a difficult job. I think it's right that we engage with the public where we've got these types of issues, trying to get some sense of prioritisation. And he's obviously trying to do that through that particular survey.
Mrs. Caine, in some places in the UK, I understand they're encouraging local people to get out there with a shovel and some hot tarmac and fill in their own potholes.
Yeah, indeed, and I've been amused by the ones that plant flowers and flower pots in the soil in the biggest potholes. I suppose the local media has raised it with the pothole of the week feature. I think the Department of Infrastructure said the minister was spending something like £14 million doing potholes, filling this targeted year. It seems though the roads, particularly the road surface, the deterioration in the weather, it's an ongoing issue, and there never seems to be enough income from vehicle tax to cover it. But we're also getting a mailbag, or I am certainly, of complaints about the level of vehicle tax increases and how can it be 10% increase when it's so far ahead of whichever measure for inflation the government's using. But it's anything that improves people getting out and putting back into their community is great. The Isle of Man has a huge tradition of that. I know from Bill Dale and Beach Buddies and a huge success, and the thousands of people have joined that. But prior to him, I've known several people around Laxey. There's a regular team of people who walk the streets and walk the beach and have been clearing it up for decades. Yeah. So the Isle of Man has a good tradition of people wanting to support their community. And I mean, the whole celebration of biosphere and this wonderful status we have from UNESCO Biosphere Reserve status, that is something to be celebrated and enjoyed, along with the Year of our Island and all the special things that have been encouraging people to go out more, do more, explore more, enjoy more.
I know it. I find it amazing. Some people for months have rubbish outside their house on the hedgerows there and things like that, just immediately outside. And eventually I tend to go and clear it up. And I think, but why doesn't the person who owns the house, they must see it when they come out there, just spend some time on picking up these bits of rubbish and make the island look better. Just going back to mobile phones, like anything, mobile phones can be used or abused. This comes from Pauline. So what better place for children to learn the correct use of mobile phones than in school, rather than ban them, which doesn't help address the problem. Education is key. That's an interesting point, isn't it?
That's the point I was trying to make, that they're an essential part of modern living. So children, particularly those who are being harmed overnight in the online or social media bullying, then that should be an essential part of learning, that you know when it's appropriate to have your mobile phone. I hate it when I go to meetings and everybody's got their phones in front of them on the table. It's kind of, could you put your phone away for an hour while we have a discussion about something? But you can hear pinging, you can hear buzzing. The most productive meetings are the ones where nobody's distracted.
You can hear pings and buzzes in the House of Keys.
You can,
and in Tynwald.
But all our papers are now on the iPad, so you can't.
So you have to refer to them.
But I think as well that if you have a class of children and they are using the mobile phones, there's very little way to check that they're actually using those mobile phones for the correct purpose at that time. And then by the end, then the lesson is over. So I think they need to be.
But surely if the teacher wanders around the class occasionally and pops up behind children, and if they are using it inappropriately,
that's not exactly communicating with the children and helping their education.
It's what teachers do, isn't it? They keep their classes in order. I don't know. Can I just put this one to Mr. Cannan? Does the UK have a beneficial ownership information scheme available to public inspection?
Yes, they do. They have got their own register up and
but that's not
running.
A public one. Not everybody. Can everybody go and have a look?
Yeah, you can access the public register, the beneficial ownership public register. The key point, I think, from our perspective, and we've looked at their public register, is that it's far from complete. If anything, parts of it are probably making a mockery of the situation. We don't think it's been done properly. But they have moved to this open register. But let's also remember, it's all very well for the UK to sort of wave the flag, but we have very much a different model on the Isle of Man in terms of our operation. It's not something that is necessarily going to materially.
People would say it's more important to us that we keep beneficial ownership under wraps.
Yeah, but we're part of we're much more sort of broadly internationally focused, if you like, in terms of the sort of investment structures and the international community. The international investment is far more important to us in terms of how it's coming into the UK, for example, than it is to the UK itself. So we've adopted the position. We recognise the challenges. We're moving to face up to those challenges, discuss those challenges, adopt all the latest standards coming through, and this will be part of the discussion that doubtless we're going to have with a number of parties over the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, just say to Tony, you sent me an email which appears to have words in Greek in it. Now, Margaret Mansfield actually knows a bit of Greek, but I don't think she would be able to translate this. Tony, if you could relay that, have another go, because I think that the machinery inside your mobile phone has actually fiddled around with some of the words. And for instance, there's one BRNIGIYD, which is in no language that I understand. We'll give you a time to resend that, and please, Tony, do so, and we'll gladly put it out. Hello, you're listening to the Mannin line, and we're very interested to hear from your calls, have your contributions, 166 studio at manxradio.com. Give us a phone here at Manx Radio. We'll be pleased to talk to you. A number of subjects which have come up, and we do have someone who actually is involved in one of the subjects, and that's to do with legal aid. And this is going back to you just raised an eyebrow at me. The public defender scheme, which obviously has come up as part of the SAVE initiative, a progress report. When it came out, its president, who was appearing last week, I think, on Sunday Opinion, Jane Grey, spoke about the proposal, and she claims that the government's figures in this regard don't stack up.
What we have noted looking at the figures that in the last 5 years, the actual average cost of the legal aid expenditure was 1.7 million and not 2.3 as stated in the report, and that over the past 5 years the legal aid expenditure has actually decreased by 804,000, contrary to the remarks made in Tynwald that legal aid was starting to spiral out of control.
Margaret Mansfield, first of all, what's your background in this? You're involved.
I'm a member of the Legal Aid Committee.
So your view of this then?
The Legal Aid Committee certainly investigated this, but because the committee has very, very limited resources, it went to the Attorney General, and we're happy to see this. And we would expect to be interested and involved if it all goes ahead. But as far as I know, there is no business plan at the moment. There is nothing in place.
We've already
maybe Mr. Cannan knows better than I do.
We've already talked about this, Mr. Cannan, obviously, but they say your figures don't stack up, and you would say yes, they do.
Well, what we do know about legal aid is that the costs fluctuate. So it's almost they've selected a set of figures. It suits the purposes to select an average, but the fact is that legal aid fluctuates. It goes up and down depending on the particular year. The key point here is that once again, following the SAVE campaign, we had an idea put to us. We've evaluated. It's got credibility in that the public defender unit has been rolled out elsewhere. There's issues around accountability, transparency, and yes, cost of delivering these sorts of legal services, and it's absolutely only right that we go ahead and look at it. We can't afford, just like all the other projects, just because people are afraid of change, it's not an excuse for us not to go ahead, have a look at this in detail, have the business plans drawn up. And the critical thing about the public defender unit, it's not something that government can just impose. It has to come to Tynwald. There has to be legislation surrounding it. So clearly around that there also has to be consultation. So once again, I think we're in danger of coming to conclusions before we've even begun to get a proper examination of these issues. And there was £1 million worth of savings attached to that. But also, let's be absolutely clear, and this was highlighted by a number of members in Tynwald, it's not just about cost when you talk about these types of issues. It's about ensuring that we are delivering and still delivering a proper and accountable service in terms of making sure that the people who require legal aid are getting proper delivery. And it's arguable at the moment whether that's necessarily being delivered by the Law Society as it, well, not by the Law Society, but by those legal professionals. And we need to examine it. And if it's got credibility, then I'm sure that Tynwald will be looking at it and supporting it. And if it hasn't got credibility, then I don't think it's going to get past go.
I was just trying to think of a word to describe the look that you gave Mr. Cannan, Mrs. Caine, when you were speaking there.
Well, no, I think the key point is that people requiring legal aid at the moment should have access to justice. So
absolutely.
The key point is access to justice and how that can most cost effectively be delivered. But there's also the element of justice must be seen to be done. And there are many people, not just the Law Society, but many people perhaps who are a little bit uncomfortable with the thought that the Public Defender Unit, if it is decided to be established, and the Public Prosecution Unit would be too close if it was under Attorney General. So there has to be separation and there has to be confidence in whatever system. And I think the most positive thing that came out of the debate for me was when Jane Wilson, as chair of the Justice Committee, said that was something that the committee, the Standing Committee, would be interested in reviewing. And that, to me, is an excellent way. It's away from government and saving, but everybody would be able to contribute.
Can you stay with justice seeking to be done? Because one subject you raised was this cameras being operated by police, and also I think it was said that they were going to be used at the NSC as well because they have problems down there. And you raised this subject about, well, what about human rights? Do people deserve to be photographed? Surely it's an effective way, if you have a camera and you know a camera is on looking at you, to mitigate some of your behaviour, isn't it?
Well, indeed, and you could say how you could establish how effective they've been with the police. Now, I did ask Mr. Malarkey as Home Affairs Minister whether they had been used in the footage had been used in prosecutions, and he confirmed that footage had been used, but he didn't know on how many occasions.
They're looking at several different varieties.
Well, apparently the 6-month trial is still ongoing, and they're now looking at different systems of cameras. My question to the Chief Minister, again after concerns had been raised with me, was about the expansion of use across public service. So you say, and he said that the prison officers were considering using them, which I suppose we can appreciate in terms of they can be used to de-escalate situations when people know there's a camera in a very fraught situation.
Yeah.
When it's volatile, then cameras I can see that they play a part in de-escalating situations. But when it's said that they may go into the Department for Education, Sport and Culture, specifically for Manx Sport and Recreation staff working on their own externally, outside or inside at the National Sports Centre, that causes me a few eyebrows to raise, I suppose. And the other point would be, well, where does that end? Do you expand it as they have done? There's a couple of schools in England, I believe, who are using them, or it's been confirmed, not the particular schools, but that teachers are having cameras.
Am I right in saying that we're behind the UK and there's all the police forces in the UK actually using them and we're not at the moment? I believe that's the picture. The last, I think, force in the UK to bring them in brought them in the other.
But in which situations and how effective are they? Because there's, in some cases, particularly in
travelling communities... if everybody using them, they are effective.
Well, my research suggests that actually in travelling communities, if police are wearing cameras, they're not at all effective because there's particular societies, particular groups within society who refuse to engage if they're going to be filmed, they refuse to be recorded because that is a breach of their human rights.
Let's just go back to one of our listeners who's phoned in. It's Damien, and this is about the Legal Aid Initiative. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, what's your question?
Okay, I'd like to pose a question to the Treasury Minister. Because, well, before I do so, I'd just like to say that I think everybody, finds the idea of a SAVE initiative in general terms laudable and something that is quite right, and it's an initiative that's appropriate given the challenges facing government. However, in relation to the SAVE initiative, it seems to me, judging by its content, it appears to be tinkering at the edges. And I would ask the Treasury Minister two questions. Firstly, why, in fact, is there not a primary focus on the source of the financial challenge, which is the pension deficit coming down the tracks, in terms of reducing the size of the public sector by natural attrition as people leave, and a restructure by way of, say, single legal entity, as in terms of priorities, because that seems to me to be the heart of the matter, along with things like capital projects that seem to be extremely expensive. And then the second thing, in relation to the legal aid initiative in particular, is why, in fact, is the Treasury Minister not focusing on the cost of the criminal justice system as a whole, looking at, for example, sentencing options, because we seem to have one of the highest prison populations per capita.
Let me put those questions, because we're running out of time. Let me put those to Mr. Cannan. Mr. Cannan?
Well, I think, thank you very much, Damien, for your questions. I think that you do raise a very critical issue in terms of saying, well, why save not getting to the real heart of the issue in terms of particularly, I think, the public sector pensions issue. And we all know it's going to cause massive issues potentially into the future for the island. What I will say is that in July there will be a debate around this issue. Behind the scenes there is a lot of debate going on at the moment as to how public sector pensions should be adjusted into the future to ensure that the impact on the public and on the taxpayer is as minimal as possible. Tynwald, what I can say at this stage, Tynwald will be presented with another report in July. It will clearly outline the forecasted performance of public sector pensions over the next couple of decades. It will also show what the options are and what the impact will be of adopting other options, including closing the scheme or closing the scheme to new entrants. And I expect that we are going to have a fairly active debate in the next 6 months as to what the option is. But I think the other question around the size of the public sector and the single legal entity. Well, the single legal entity, that debate is a very active debate. The size of the public sector is a real core issue. And Dame is absolutely right. If we want to reduce our costs, we should start to reduce the size of the public sector. But when you start doing that, obviously, services are impacted. And the whole point of the Save campaign was to say, look, what services can we run more efficiently, effectively, in different ways without necessarily going down the route of active
we'll have
cuts.
to close it there because we're coming to the end of the programme towards it. We'll have to fit in a break. Thank you very much, Damien, but we have to have one of the...
Station, Manx Radio.
Well, unfortunately, we've reached the end of the programme. It came rather swiftly, more swiftly at the end than I actually organised for. My apologies for that. But thanks very much indeed to the Treasury Minister, Alfred Cannan, for joining us. Also, the Garff, MHK, Daphne, Caine and Margaret Mansfield of Malew Commissioners. And indeed, thank you very much for listening to the programme. A lot of people, obviously, more concerned about what's happening in the island, as they should be, than what's happening on the pitch over there in Russia. Our thanks for that. But it's now come round to 2 o'clock, which is news time.